Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I think that now I might actually be live. I had some technical difficulties as I was figuring out the new event system. Anyway, I am here today to do a live design spotlight and talk about one of my favorite designs, the Denise shawl. And oh goody, I see myself. So that means that I'm actually working. Um, Please let me know if you can hear me okay. This is a slightly different setup from what I normally do in a live stream, but I had to not only start things through the software, but I had to start it through the browser, and yay, it's working. Awesome. That is great, great news. All right. I am a bit flustered because this was just different from the way things work normally. So, oh gosh. Anyway, I can't even remember what I've said, so I will start a little bit again. But I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and in addition to doing yarn dyeing tutorials here on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel, I also have done a lot of knitting design. I offer most of my designs for free on my website, chemknits.com, but there's some designs that I actually sell the patterns for because the designs were a little more intense to write the patterns and distribute it. And one of those designs is this shawl, which is the Denise shawl. Oh, I think I want to up the brightness a bit. Yeah. Anyway. The way that I was just wearing the shawl is one of my favorite ways to wear a shawl, even a large triangular shawl like this. I like to wear them as scarves, but I know many other people that will in fact wear it in a more traditional shawl-like way. The triangle shape is really nice for fitting around your neck, and it hangs nicely. But one reason why I like and I picked the triangular shape is that it is a really easy one to knit. When you're making let's see if I can back up enough so you can see more of the whole shawl. Here we go. You can see that it's nice and lacy because you can see me through it a bit. But these triangular shawls are pretty nice. You start them actually by knitting a few stitches right up here at the top center. You start with a tab of maybe 2 stitches and pick up along the edge, and then you increase on every round with these yarn overs that you see along the edge. And as you're doing these yarn overs, you increase the amount of stitches so that you knit from the top center all the way to the outside edge. And that's where also, if you're using an asymmetric yarn, you can get a nice gradient like you see here. Thank you. I am a huge, huge fan of this. So the way this started is in 2012, I decided to do the 12 Shawls in 2012 knitting challenge. And I found myself also wanting to use up yarns that I had in my stash. And so I just started doing a lot of knitting of shawls and looking at patterns. And I started sketching out some ideas that I had. And let's see. I thought I bookmarked it, but apparently I may not have bookmarked it. Okay. And so sometimes I will, in my design notebook, sketch out an idea for a shawl that I have, but then I need to go through and actually figure out the design and knit it. When I went to Vogue Knitting Live, I took a class with, and I'm totally blanking who the class was with right now. Yeah, I took a class on triangular shawl design, which wasn't what I initially signed up for, but the class I had signed up for was canceled, so I was transferred in there. And the biggest tips, beyond some advice with math when it comes to designing a triangular shawl, was to just swatch it. And so that's something that I did. I would sketch out some lace and try to figure out where the decreases would need to go to get the lace to work properly. And then I did some swatching to troubleshoot and figure out how I needed things to lay to get the stitches where I wanted them. And so that was something that is pretty cool. But the other thing that, and the reason why I chose the Denise shawl to do for my first spotlight, is that I actually dyed the yarn for this shawl. And I did a dyeing experiment specifically because I was hoping to get a nice gradient. And so you can see that if we start at the top center of the shawl, you've got this, basically it's a sage green with hints and little bits of purple. And then as you go to the bottom of the shawl, you get more and more of the purple color. And the way that I did this, I'm gonna put this back on. The way that I did this was by taking some intact balls of palette yarn. I used 3 different balls of palette, and I decided to dye the intact balls of yarn with some mixtures of Wilton's Violet. Maybe there was some black and some other colors in there. And the way that these balls are, it's a little different from the center pull balls that I wind, but you can see that they have this big center. So you can access a lot of the fiber in the middle in addition to the yarns that are on the outside. And so this was something that I thought would be really, really cool. Now I went through, maybe not this quite sampler, but I went through and I selected a green that I wrote down as being sage, but it looks like it was maybe sagebrush, which is this sort of pale green color right there. I knew that with the dyeing technique I wanted to try, that I would end up with some undyed patches of yarn. So I wanted to pick a color that was not quite neutral, but I wanted to pick a color that would read pretty on the finished product, but also would go really nicely with the colors that I wanted to add with food coloring. And so here is some of the leftover finished yarn. This one doesn't have quite as much color, but you can see some of the original sage tones in addition to some deeper blues and the purples that are left over in this ball of yarn. And these are some of the colors that are located near like the top center of the yarn or of the shawl. So what I did, since I dyed 3 balls of yarn in this asymmetric way, but I don't have stripes or something looking like stripes on the shawl. I have a fairly intact gradient. So I started knitting this shawl using 2 of the balls of yarn that I dyed, alternating the balls of yarn every couple rows. So that would allow me to use 2 balls of yarn to get 1 gradient. And then I started running out of those yarns as I approached the end of the shawl. So you can see that the actual edge, maybe if I put it against my, yeah. So you can see at this bottom edge, we get the darker, more purple colors, and then it starts to get lighter again. That's because I started to run out of yarn before I got to the bottom of the shawl. And so therefore I took the 3rd ball of yarn and started working backwards from it along the bottom, so that way I could extend this darker portion of the shawl. The shawl in the pattern comes in 2 different sizes. This is the large, oh, that's the wrong side. This is the large size, which you can see is quite large actually after blocking. But it also comes in with instructions for doing a smaller size, which is essentially has you doing 1 fewer repeat of this kind of twisted chain pattern. And let's see, since it's showing up nicely when I do it on myself, let's see if I can, I'm like trying to rotate on the camera. So you can see that there's, on the center of each panel, there are these kind of overlapping squares. And then you have twists that go in kind of a mirror direction down each center panel. And then this is mirrored on both sides of the shawl. And so Yeah, and please feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions about my design process or what I was thinking about the yarns. But when I'm trying to, sometimes I have an idea for a design and then I go around and look for a stitch pattern. But this time I was flipping through one of my knitting stitch dictionaries and I came across this lace panel. And I thought I liked the sense of the twist or almost the braided feeling. And that inspired me to try to incorporate this into some kind of shawl design. And I didn't really know exactly how I was going to do it, but I wanted to somehow use this braid in the design. But if you look at, I actually modified it a little bit. I didn't like the very center portion of it where it had like the one little yarn over in the center. And so I actually shrunk that to be more of a square in the center. But I started doing some sketching where, let's see, I think that unfortunately one of the good images that I have is like this. Okay, you can't really see. But I do a lot of my graph work in Microsoft Excel. And so what I did was I actually mapped out where I wanted the yarn overs to go. So I drew on my graph paper basically just the circles of the yarn overs. And then I went through and I filled in the corresponding knit two togethers or SSKs or maybe a two-stitch decrease on the chart to see if it would help make stitches end up being where I wanted it to go. And then I started knitting a swatch. And I did a swatch where I did one repeat of each of the three main charted sections, which were the two different twists and then this, eek, okay, I'm like moving backwards, and this center portion here. And so then once I had swatched and I knew that I had the lace work figured out, I could go into making the final chart. And another thing that was really helpful about my class was the way that they recommended that you sort of look at the grid along the side. And so you would basically draw out one half of your shawl and then have someone knit it twice. And so that's something that was something that visually helped me understand how to lay things out in a chart. Now, the Denise shawl knitting pattern has both charted and written instructions. So if you prefer charts, I've got you covered, but if you prefer written instructions, I also have those in there for you. And both sets of instructions have been tested by test knitters. If you are a designer and want to find some test knitters, I highly recommend a couple groups on Ravelry. There are two groups, Free Pattern Testers and the Testing Pool. And I forget which one of them has more strict requirements for how you set up and run the test. And the other one is a little like more relaxed in the way that you can run a test. But you can find volunteers who will use their own yarn and you give them a deadline, and usually in exchange for giving them the pattern for free, they will work and test out the design for you, which is helpful for copy editing purposes, but also for making sure your yardage requirements work. And I believe that, so this large shawl used over 2 balls of the palette yarn, but I believe that the small version of the shawl would use under 2 balls of the palette yarn. So that is something that if you wanted to make one of these but use a little less yarn because you have some palette in your stash, then the 2 balls of palette yarn would be equivalent to a 100-gram skein of the bare yarn. So you could get some bare palette yarn or even the stroll fingering and do some cake dyeing to make an asymmetric skein, and then you could use it on a shawl pattern like the Denise shawl. Oh, and I should add that Right now, I am running a promotion. So I'm offering 15% off the Denise Shawl knitting pattern. Just use the code SPOTLIGHT1. It's all caps and it's also in the video description when you check out, and you'll get 15% off the knitting pattern. Ooh, metallic colors. That would be really, really pretty. Yeah, I have a lot of knitting like Stitchnaries in my stash, and so sometimes I have an idea and I start going through, or I'll find a cable or something that I like but want to tweak, and so it's a nice starting off point. I just wish that they had bothered to chart out. They only have written instructions, and I prefer charts because I design very visually. But if you ever go back and look at my 14 cable hat design, where I show, like, I literally copied and pasted photocopies of different cables together while I was working out the design. And so that one was a lot of fun. But I really, really liked designing this project just because it kind of combined some of my yarn dyeing experiments with designing a project for myself. And I have a lot of trouble naming patterns. You might notice that I don't really name my yarn colorways. If you are one of my Kickstarter backers, I just put, instead of a color name, I put the title of the video that the yarn came from. But this one was a little easy because I forgot to bring stitch markers to the Vogue knitting class that I attended. And I was sitting next to a really nice woman who just gave me some. And I couldn't remember exactly what her name was. I remembered it began with a D. And my mind thought that it was probably Denise. And so therefore I decided to name the pattern after this random act of kindness that a stranger showed me. And so that's something that was a little fun. Did I have anything else over here? I wish I know that I have some of the swatches I knit for this shawl somewhere, and I looked for them this morning and couldn't find them, unfortunately, because that's something that would have been fun to show off. But I don't knit and dye with the palette fingering weight yarn as much as I used to, but I really like it for shawls. It has a lot of memory. I knit this ages ago, and the holes and the peaks at the end of the shawl are still in really nice shape. And yeah, it's actually it is the first 100% wool yarn that I ever dyed with, and was one of my staples before I switched to using the stroll fingering a bit more. But I just, this is a lot of fun, and I thought that it would be really nice to show off one of my designs and to use some of these live streams to kind of talk about what my thought process was when I was making these projects. And especially if I've dyed the yarn for it, then, dyeing yarn specifically with a project in mind is a lot of fun. And so I think that a lot of these asymmetric techniques that I do lend themselves really, really nicely to a shawl because I think that the gradients just work really, really nicely. And if you know the approximate yardage that one of your projects takes, you can use that to your advantage if you're going to do an asymmetric yarn and okay, using 100 grams of palette is about what I will need for this shawl. I've done a bunch with this needle size and this yarn, and so I know that's about what it'll take. Then you can kind of backtrack to decide how big your yarn cake should be when designing your asymmetric gradient. And if you know that you might need a little more than that, then you can make your yarn cake a little bigger to accommodate that or give you a little more wiggle room. So yeah, I think I haven't knit. So I did 12 shawls in 2012, and then I was going to do 13 in 2013, but then I had Lucas. And so I used to love doing mystery shawl knit-alongs and things like that. I really, really enjoy lace work. I just don't quite have the time and the attention span to get it done while also taking care of the kids. But I'm hoping as my youngest gets older to have some more time to do some lace work again, and also some more time to dedicate to some of my more complex design work. I have a really, really cool cable that I have been working on. And it's really not that complicated, but it looks cool. And it's something that, you know, I've just been sitting on for a while, and I have the sketches on graph paper up in my knitting room. And so I hope that that's something that I can actually translate into the design at some point. But I was being a little finicky because I needed to figure out the decreases of the hats. Oh no, you were waiting on Facebook? I'm so sorry. I think that there's a DVR function, so you might be able to backtrack, but also the replay will be up on the channel in a little bit. Thank you. I really, really like this one a lot. Unfortunately, I don't wear my shawls very much right now, and I have a lot of shawl and shawlettes. One shape that I really want to design, but I haven't really started working on anything like that yet, is I'd really like to do a crescent shaped one. I love the shape and the curve of that. And I wear them kind of just like this as well. I think that before kids, my uniform was basically a white or black t-shirt and then one of my shawls around my neck in the fall and winter. And so I kind of miss having that. But with young kids, they pull and drool and their noses run. So they have stayed safely in a little suitcase for the last couple of years. Yeah, but if there's not, trying to think if there's anything I left off of the process. Oh, I guess I also did a swatch of the bottom of the shawl as well. So I did swatches, and I have actually a blog post of the design called Behind the Design of the Denise Shawl. But so in addition to swatching the individual different sections, you know, the left and right twists, and then that center stacked square panel, I also swatched the bottom of the shawl and these points because I had some different ideas of how I might want to end it, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a little diamond or what near the bottom, but I have these little, I guess, V shapes to add a little more, there you can kind of see, a little more lace along the bottom edge. And so I did a swatch and then blocked it to see how the different shapes I was working with would look when I pinned it out, and that helped me narrow it down. So it's another reason why swatching, especially if you're designing, can be a really, really good idea. Sometimes I'm bad and I don't bother and I just sort of go for it. Other times I turn swatching into another design. Like the first time I did a DNA cable, I needed to swatch it, and I was like, oh, I'll just make a beer cozy with DNA running up it. And so that way I could swatch the design before working on the actual project that I wanted to use the cable for. And I still have that beer cozy today. So it's kind of nice to combine swatching with a mini design sometimes. But, oh, and I cannot see comments right now. Oh, I inspire you. I'm dying with food coloring Kool-Aid now. Oh, I'm so glad. It's a lot of fun, and especially it turns into so much fun when you have something you want to make, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, but I want to dye yarn for it myself. And then you start planning how to dye the yarn based on what you want to make. And so there was one time I did a hand crank pre-knit blank using my crank knitting machine to dip dye it in a broken violet colorway, because I wanted to knit a hat that showed the 3 colors. And I thought about how quickly to dip it because of the difference. You know, I knew that I would use 2/3 of the yarn in the hat, and somehow it all worked out perfectly. And I have this hat with this amazing gradient on it. And it just worked, and it felt awesome. Not everything always works the way you want it, but sometimes when you plan something out and it just works, it feels so, so good. Would this pattern be easy for a beginning shawl knitter? I think that it could be, depending on what techniques you're comfortable with. Let me peek at so I think that the stitches that you need for this are knit, purl, yarn overs. You need to know how to knit two together through the back loop. And I believe that's something that I actually have a tutorial on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. I'll double check that. But actually, those are the 3 stitches. What? Oh, no. Okay, I must be missing. No, I was missing some other stitches. I was like, that's not possible. Okay, so those are some of the main stitches. Oh, because I think the bind off is a knit two together through the back loop bind off. So there are some like other decreases and stuff in there, but I think that the pattern itself, I have the stitches defined, and I think the pattern itself is a pretty easy rhythm to follow. And I've tried to really highlight things step by step. So I guess it depends on your comfort level. It is not a complex lace pattern like some other ones. The repeats are, let me see if I say how many stitches there are in the repeats. Maybe I don't say how big each of the sections are, but if you have some stitch markers, that can really help. Yeah, but I have the chart color coded, and I have see, it's been a while since I knit this, so I'm now looking through. So I have the pattern has a diagram that shows where you start knitting and the direction that you knit, in addition to some suggestions. Oh, and I even have a YouTube video for the bind off that I recommend for the pattern. So yeah, so I think that it definitely could be approachable by a beginning lace knitter if you are, especially if you're comfortable with decreases and following stitch instructions or charts. I personally really prefer charts to anything else, but that's just me. You're currently spinning some hand-dyed wool for a sweater. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, and you're doing sprinkles with Kool-Aid and a salt shaker. Nice. Oh, did you mix? Are you sprinkling the Kool-Aid on the yarn, or are you using actual sprinkles in addition to some Kool-Aid? Both of those seem like a lot of fun. I love doing specks, and I've been playing a lot with sugar sprinkles right now. I love the specks of colors that they can bring to the yarn. And I've got some really, really exciting dyeing projects coming up over the next, well, I guess in the future. For the rest of the year, I've got exciting dyeing projects coming up. But I hope to, in addition to keeping up with Dye Pot Weekly, I hope to release a few new knitting designs this year as well. So we'll see if I'm able to do that. And hopefully doing the occasional design spotlight will remind me of my other love and encourage me to do some more design work. Oh, awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this little design spotlight of my first, is this my first lace? I'm not 100% sure if it's my first lace, but it's certainly my first shawl. And I'm gonna back up so you can see the whole pretty. I should have, see, you could almost do it like an apron as well. But it felt very me, and you also don't need to block the shawl quite as heavily, but I really enjoy the airy airy feel, and it's just got a really nice cozy drape, and it's perfect for a nice, well, the outside is blown out, but it's a nice snowy day outside. Oh, yeah, speckled yarns are fantastic. I think that doing a shawl and a speckled yarn would be really, really, really awesome. But anyway, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for joining me today. Stay tuned. What's today? Wednesday? Yeah, stay tuned. On Friday, there is a new episode of Dye Pot Weekly coming out, a bonus Friday Dye Pot Weekly episode. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of these videos. Thanks for joining me, everyone. And let's see if I can figure out how to stop this in the new system. Aha. Woo! Yes, dyeing yarn is the best, and taking advantage of knits pick sales is fantastic. Oh yeah, my speaking of knit picks, my affiliate link for the palette yarn, not the bear, the colors that I used is in the description. I used it's the color sage or sage bush, sagebrush, as the base to dye this. And so, yeah, take advantage and happy dyeing. And I wish you a lot of luck planning your own dyeing adventures for your knitting projects. Bye, everyone.